For 40 years, an old man lived in the house next door, behind a 10-foot fence my son built to keep him away. My son Sean and his wife Chloe sued him 3 times. They called him a criminal, a menace, a danger to our property value. They told the whole neighborhood, "He's dangerous, stay away." When he died last Tuesday, I was the only person who attended his funeral. My son stayed home to host a barbecue and celebrate, but then the lawyer handed me the will, and the celebration stopped dead in its tracks. It turns out the old man wasn't dangerous because he had a gun. He was dangerous because he owned the land my son's house was built on. Before I tell you how I evicted my own kids, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe greedy people always get what they deserve. The rain this time of year cuts right through a cheap black suit, especially when you're 78 years old. I stood there watching the mud slide off the shovel and hit the simple pine box. There was no priest, no eulogy, just me and 2 cemetery union guys who looked like they were dying to go to lunch. Victor Kowalski was 82. He had lived next to me for 3 years and next to the property for 40. According to my daughter-in-law Chloe, he was a monster. According to my son Sean, he was a plague on the neighborhood. But looking at that little box, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man who died without anyone caring enough to buy him a single flower. My phone vibrated in my pocket, buzzing against my leg like an angry hornet. I pulled it out, wiping the raindrops off the screen. It was a text from Sean. "Is he buried yet, Dad? Get back here quick. Chloe already called the contractors to tear down that ugly fence. We're opening the good champagne." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred together. I looked back at the fresh dirt covering the only neighbor who had ever offered me a cup of coffee without asking for a loan. "I'm sorry, Victor," I whispered to the wet grass. "I'm sorry for living with wolves." I drove my beat-up Ford truck back to the house. The house that on paper belongs to Sean and Chloe, but was actually bought with the $500,000 I got from cashing out my factory pension and selling my old place. I pulled into the driveway, and the sound hit me before I even opened the door. The sound of destruction. Sledgehammers smashing into wood, cracking, banging, splinters flying. Chloe was standing in the backyard in her designer yoga pants, holding a glass of white wine and pointing at the workers like a general commanding her troops. "Tear it all down!" she yelled, her voice so shrill it could shatter glass. "I want that view cleared before sunset. That old criminal is gone, and I want his shadow out of my yard." I walked right past her. Water dripped from my hat onto the expensive paving stones I had paid for. She didn't even look at me. She was too busy calculating the new estimated property value on her phone. Inside, the kitchen smelled like expensive meat and victory. Sean was at the kitchen island, fighting to get the cork out of a bottle of pricey champagne. He looked up, his face flushed with the kind of excitement most men get when their first kid is born, not when a neighbor dies. "You're back," he said, pouring the bubbling liquid into a crystal flute. "Here, Dad, take a drink. The air already feels cleaner, doesn't it?" I pushed the glass away. My hand was shaking, not from age, but from a rage I hadn't felt since my days as an assembly line foreman catching guys stealing parts. "He's been dead for 3 hours, Sean," I said, keeping my voice low. "The dirt hasn't even settled." Sean let out a laugh, a dry, barking sound. He took a long sip of wine. "And our property value just went up 200 grand. Don't be a hypocrite, Dad. You hated looking at that overgrown jungle of his too. You're just grumpy because you got wet. Go change. We're grilling steaks in 20 minutes. Now that the fence is gone, we've got room for the big smoker. He turned his back on me, dismissing me like I was the hired help. I walked down the hall to the guest suite. That's what they call it, to make it sound fancy. I call it the garage conversion, where they stuck the old man so they could blow through his social security check. I didn't turn on the lights. I just went to the window overlooking the backyard. The fence was already gone, reduced to a pile of splintered grey wood. I watched as Sean walked right up to the property line. He kicked over a terracotta pot that had been on Victor's side. It was a rose bush, an heirloom rose Victor had spent years pruning with his shaky hands. I watched my son kick it over, spilling the dirt, stomping on the stems to make room for his grill. He laughed, raising his glass to Chloe. They looked like royalty inspecting a conquered kingdom. They had no idea the war hadn't even started yet, and they certainly didn't know the man they just buried had left behind something far more dangerous than a ghost. He had left a map, and I was about to find it. I sat in the dark of the guest suite, which was really just a glorified storage unit with a bed, and stared out the window at the empty house next door. The rain had stopped, but the smell of wet earth and charcoal from Sean's grill still hung heavy in the air. The party was winding down, but the laughter of my son and his wife still echoed, sharp and cruel. They were celebrating a victory over a man who had never raised a hand against them. I looked at the dark windows of Victor's house, and the memories started flooding back, hitting me like old shrapnel. I realized then that the hatred didn't start with the fence. It started with a lie. It was 5 years ago, right after I moved in. It was a blistering July day. Chloe was laying out on the back deck in a lawn chair that cost more than my first car, trying to perfect her tan for a beach trip. Victor was in his yard, standing on a stepladder. He was 80 back then, but he still moved with a precise military stiffness. He was pruning an old oak, cutting down dead branches that threatened to fall during storm season. He was focused on the wood, on the work. I was watching from the kitchen window, drinking a glass of water. I saw him. He never looked down. He never looked at her. But suddenly, Chloe sat up and screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a performance. She wrapped herself in her towel like she had been violated. She ran inside, crying hysterically, claiming the creep next door was staring at her. She told Sean that Victor had been watching her, that he had binoculars, that he was a predator. It was a complete fabrication. I tried to tell Sean. I said, "Son, the man was cutting a branch. I was watching him." But Sean didn't want the truth. He wanted an enemy. He wanted a reason to flex his muscles and show his wife he was the protector. He marched right up to the property line and screamed threats at an 80-year-old man who was just trying to keep his trees healthy. That was the week the fence went up. Sean didn't just build a fence, he built a barricade. He hired a contractor to install a solid 10-foot wooden wall that violated 3 different HOA guidelines. But Sean bullied the board into approving it. He claimed it was a safety issue. He said, "We have to protect our privacy from that dangerous element." The fence was so high, it blocked the morning sun from Victor's kitchen window. I remember seeing Victor standing in his yard as they nailed the final planks. He didn't yell. He didn't call the city inspectors. He just stood there, watching the light disappear from his home, his face completely unreadable. He turned around, went inside, and for the next 5 years he lived in the dark. The shadow my son cast. Then came the lawsuits. If there's one thing Sean loves more than money, it's litigation. He thinks suing someone makes him powerful. He thinks the law is a weapon to beat people into submission. 3 years ago, Victor was sitting on his back porch on a Sunday afternoon. He had an old transistor radio, the kind that runs on batteries and crackles when the weather changes. He was listening to the news, or maybe a baseball game. It wasn't loud. I could barely hear it from my room. But Sean had a hangover, and he decided the sound was an assault on his peace. He didn't ask Victor to turn it down. He didn't walk over and knock on the door like a neighbour. He pulled out his phone, recorded a video, and filed a civil suit for noise disturbance and harassment. I told Sean he was being ridiculous. I said, "It's just a radio, son. Leave him alone." Sean looked at me with that sneer he developed when he started making big money flipping overpriced condos. He said, "It's about standards, Dad. We can't let people like him drag the neighborhood down. If we give him an inch, he'll take a mile." They dragged Victor to court. I expected the old man to fight. I expected him to hire a lawyer and expose Sean as the petty tyrant he was. But Victor didn't do that. He showed up to the hearing alone, wearing a suit that was clearly 20 years old, but perfectly pressed. He didn't argue. He didn't cross-examine. When the judge asked if he was playing the radio, Victor simply said, "Yes." The judge fined him $500. It was a slap on the wrist, a nuisance fee. But for Sean, it was the vindication of the century. I remember the look on Victor's face when he wrote the check. He wasn't shaking with fear. He wasn't angry. He looked bored. He handed the check to the clerk with the same expression a man has when he pays for a gallon of milk. He looked at Sean, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and walked out. Sean and Chloe celebrated that night with sushi and wine. "See?" Sean bragged, pointing at me with his chopsticks. He paid up immediately. He didn't want any discovery. He didn't want anyone digging into his past. That's what criminals do, Dad. They pay to make the law go away. He's hiding something. He's weak, and he knows I've got him cornered. That was the narrative they built. Victor was the villain. They were the heroes protecting their castle. Every time Victor avoided a conflict, they saw it as cowardice. When Chloe claimed his leaves were blowing into her pool, Victor hired a service to clean his yard twice a week. When Sean complained that Victor's car was parked too close to the street, Victor moved it into the garage. They pushed, and he stepped back. They attacked, and he retreated. They mistook his silence for submission. They mistook his dignity for weakness. I sat there in the dark, watching the moonlight reflect off the vinyl siding of Sean's house, and felt a deep, stinging shame. I had let this happen. I had watched them bully an old man for years and had done nothing but offer weak protests. I had let them convince themselves they were the kings of this hill. But as I stared at the dark windows of the dead man's house, I remembered the look in his eyes in that courtroom. It wasn't the look of a man who was afraid. It was the look of a man who was waiting. It was the look of a sniper waiting hours for the perfect shot, ignoring the flies buzzing around his head. Sean thought he had won a war. He didn't realize Victor had simply been letting him waste his ammo. And now, looking at the empty house, I had the terrible feeling that the old man's patience had finally run out, and the bill was about to come due. The next morning, the smell of stale champagne and regret was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh coffee and aggressive ambition. I walked into the kitchen to find the island covered not with breakfast plates, but with massive architectural blueprints. Sean was leaning over them with a red marker in his hand, his eyes bright with a manic energy that usually meant he was about to do something expensive and stupid. Chloe was standing next to him, drinking a green smoothie, eyeing the drawings with the same lust she usually reserved for designer handbags. They didn't even say good morning. Sean just waved me over, tapping the paper with the marker like he had just struck oil in the backyard. "Look at this, Dad," he said, his voice vibrating with excitement. "I stayed up half the night sketching this out. This isn't just a backyard renovation, this is a legacy project." He traced a line that cut right through where the fence used to be, slicing deep into Victor's property. "We're going to level the dirt here, flatten his garden, and put in an infinity pool. A real one, with a vanishing edge looking out over the valley. And right here, where his old tool shed is, we're building a cabana. Full outdoor kitchen, changing rooms, maybe even a sauna. It's going to triple the value of this house overnight." I looked at the lines on the paper. They were bold and confident, cutting across property boundaries like they didn't exist. "Son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you're drawing on land that doesn't belong to you. Victor might be dead, but that land still belongs to his estate. You can't just pour concrete on another man's property." Sean rolled his eyes, a gesture he had perfected as a teenager and never outgrew. "That's where you're wrong, Dad. You're thinking like an old factory worker, not a real estate investor." He stood up straight, puffing out his chest, ready to deliver the speech he had clearly rehearsed. "Victor had no wife, no kids, no family anyone has seen in 40 years. He died intestate, which means without a will. That land is going to sit in legal limbo for decades. The state doesn't care about a quarter acre of grass. It's abandoned property now. And that's where the law comes in. It's called adverse possession. If we fence it in, maintain it, and use it openly for 10 years, the title transfers to us. It's free land, Dad. We just have to be bold enough to take it. We put up a new fence 20 feet inside his lot. We build the pool, and by the time anyone from the county notices, the statute of limitations will have run out. It's a brilliant play." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the greed that had replaced his morality. I saw a man who thought theft was a business strategy. "Sean, this isn't a legal loophole. It's trespassing. It's stealing. And if an heir shows up or if the bank comes for the deed, you're going to be left with a half-built pool and a lawsuit that will bankrupt you. Are you gambling with your home?" That was when Chloe slammed her smoothie glass down on the granite counter. The sound was sharp, like a judge's gavel striking wood. She turned to me, her face hard and cold, stripping away any pretense of familial affection. "Stop it, Peter," she snapped. "Just stop. You're always so negative, always so scared. That's why you spent your whole life working for a paycheck while other men built empires. You don't have the vision for this." I started to argue, to remind them that my paycheck had paid for the roof over their heads, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand that was so dismissive it felt like a slap. "And let's get one thing straight," she hissed, stepping closer to me. "You are not a partner in this house. You're a guest, a long-term guest. That $500,000 you gave us wasn't an investment. It was rent, paid in advance. It was a retirement buyout, so we'd take care of you instead of sticking you in a nursing home. So don't you dare stand in my kitchen and tell us how to manage our assets. You're here because we allow you to be here. Don't make us regret it." The room fell dead silent. The hum of the refrigerator sounded deafening. Sean didn't defend me. He didn't tell his wife she had gone too far. He just looked down at his blueprints, tracing the line of the infinity pool, pretending he hadn't heard his wife reduce his father to a tenant. I looked at them both, at the son I raised and the woman he married. And I felt something inside me finally snap. It wasn't a loud break, it was a quiet, clean fracture. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was helpless. They thought my money was gone and my spirit was broken. They were wrong. I turned around without saying a word and walked back to my room. If I was just a guest, then I didn't need to worry about the homeowner's problems. And looking at those blueprints on that table, I knew the problems were just beginning. 2 days later, the reality of Sean's grand master plan hit a financial brick wall. It turns out hiring a demolition crew and renting heavy excavators requires a deposit that maxed out credit cards can't cover. Sean cornered me in the hallway as I was coming back from a walk. This time he wasn't holding blueprints. He was holding a clipboard with a thick stack of papers. He didn't ask how my walk was. He didn't offer me a glass of water. He just shoved the clipboard against my chest. "Sign here," he said, clicking a pen and holding it out. "We need to open a home equity line of credit. The bank needs a cosigner with a clean history and guaranteed stable income. That's you." I looked at the papers. The numbers were staggering. He wanted to borrow another 100 grand against the equity of a house that was already mortgaged to the hilt. Equity that, ironically, only existed because of my down payment. "Son," I said, pushing the clipboard back, "I'm not signing this. You're digging a hole you won't be able to climb out of. You don't have permits, you don't have title to the land, and you certainly don't have the income to service this debt." Sean's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since he was a toddler denied candy. "It's bridge capital, Dad," he spat. "Once the pool is in, we refinance based on the new appraisal. It's basic economics. Stop being a roadblock and help me build our future." I looked him dead in the eye. It wasn't our future. It was his fantasy. "I gave you $500,000, Sean. That was my life's work. That was my sweat and my broken back. I'm not gambling my pension on a stolen patch of grass. The answer is no." I walked past him and shut my bedroom door. I heard him throw the clipboard against the wall. I heard him scream at Chloe that I was sabotaging them. Then I heard silence. But silence in this house is never peaceful. It's just the calm before the punishment. That night, the temperature in my room started to drop. It was unusually cold for October, a damp chill that settled right into your bones. I went to the thermostat on the wall of my suite. It was dead. The screen was blank. I tried to turn on my laptop to check my email, to connect with the few friends I had left from the factory. No connection. The Wi-Fi signal was gone. I checked my phone. Disconnected from the network. I walked out into the main house. It was warm out there. The fireplace was crackling. Chloe was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, wrapped in a cashmere throw. "The heat is off in my room," I said, standing in the doorway, "and the internet is down." She didn't look up. She didn't pause her scrolling. "Oh yeah," she said, her voice casually cruel. "We're reviewing the household budget. Since you won't help us secure the financing we need for the upgrades, we have to make cuts elsewhere. Utilities are very expensive. Peter, we have to save money wherever we can. We call it austerity measures. If you want the amenities turned back on, you know where the pen is." I stood there, shivering slightly, looking at the woman who was supposed to be my daughter. She wasn't just being mean, she was negotiating. She was holding my basic comfort hostage for a signature. She was treating me like an unruly prisoner who needed to be broken. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I just turned around and walked back into my freezing room. I put on my heavy winter coat and sat on the edge of the bed. My breath made little clouds in the air. That was the moment the very last thread of paternal guilt snapped. I was no longer a father to them. I was an asset to be liquidated. I was a hostage. I looked out the window at Victor's house. It was dark and silent, but it stood strong against the wind. Sean and Chloe thought Victor was just a helpless old man, a victim waiting to be plundered. But as the cold seeped into my room, I realized something. Victor had survived them for years. He had played a game they didn't even know they were playing. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to escape this frozen prison, I needed to know how he did it. I needed to know who Victor Kowalski really was. He wasn't just a neighbor. He was the key. And tomorrow, while they were busy spending money they didn't have, I was going to find the weapon he left behind. The next morning, the house finally went quiet. I watched from behind the curtain as Sean pulled out of the driveway in his leased luxury SUV, heading off to sell houses he couldn't afford to buy himself. 20 minutes later, Chloe left. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a yoga mat, heading to a spa that cost $300 a session. She walked right past my freezing window without a glance, oblivious to the fact that her luxury was being funded by my misery. As soon as her tail lights disappeared around the curve of the cul-de-sac, I moved. I didn't grab a coat. The cold kept me sharp. I slipped out the back door and walked across the muddy scar where the fence used to be. It felt strange crossing that line. For 5 years, that boundary had been a demilitarized zone, a place of shouted insults and legal threats. Now it was just open ground, vulnerable and exposed. I walked up to Victor's back porch. The wood was weathered but solid, no rot. The man took care of his things. I wasn't planning on breaking into the house itself. I wasn't a thief. But I needed to know who we were dealing with. I needed ammo. I walked around to the front of the house. The mailbox at the end of the driveway was overflowing. It was a sturdy brick column built to last, unlike the plastic one Sean had installed that cracked the first winter. A bundle of mail was wedged inside, sticking halfway out. Sean had ignored it. To him, Victor didn't exist anymore, so his mail was just garbage waiting to be bulldozed. I pulled the bundle loose. It was heavy, wet from the rain, smelling of damp paper. I started shuffling through it right there in the driveway. Most of it was standard junk hearing aid coupons, gutter cleaning flyers. But near the bottom, buried under a supermarket circular, was a thick white envelope. It wasn't a standard letter size. It was rigid. The return address in the top left corner stopped my breath. Department of Defense, Washington, D.C. It wasn't a form letter. It was sealed with a security clearance stamp. I ran my thumb over the raised ink. You don't get mail like this unless you're someone who matters. Unless you're someone who knows secrets. My hands were shaking as I tucked the envelope under my arm and kept digging. Below that was a magazine wrapped in plastic. It wasn't a supermarket tabloid. It was a trade publication called Structural Engineering Quarterly. It looked expensive, glossy and substantial. I ripped the plastic open. On the cover was a black and white photograph of a massive suspension bridge, a steel leviathan crossing a foggy bay. It was a bridge I recognized immediately. Everyone in America would recognize it. It was an icon of industrial power. But it was the caption underneath that made my knees go weak. It read, "The Invisible Architect," a retrospective on the hidden works of Chief Engineer Victor Kowalski. I stared at the name. Victor Kowalski. Victor, my neighbor. The man Chloe called a pervert. The man Sean called a loser. He wasn't a criminal hiding from the law. He was the man who built the foundations of the law. He designed bridges that carried millions of people. He built dams that held back rivers. He was a giant, a quiet, stoic giant who had retreated to a sleepy suburb to grow roses and listen to his radio, only to be tormented by a pair of shallow grifters who thought success was measured by the brand of your purse. I flipped the magazine open to the cover story. There was a photo of a younger Victor standing on a steel beam 500 feet in the air, holding blueprints, looking at the camera with that same calm, unbothered expression he had worn in the courtroom. The article described him as a brilliant strategist, a master of logistics and structural integrity, a man who solved impossible problems for the Army Corps of Engineers for 40 years. It listed commendations, medals, projects that were classified for decades. I looked up from the page and stared at the modest ranch house in front of me. It looked different now. It didn't look run down. It looked camouflaged. Victor hadn't been hiding because he was ashamed. He was hiding because he was tired. He had spent his life holding up the world, and all he wanted was a little peace. And my son had denied him that. My son had treated a national asset like a nuisance. A wave of nausea hit me. It wasn't just shame anymore, it was fear. Sean thought he was fighting a weak old man. He thought he was taking candy from a baby. He had no idea he was declaring war on a fortress. Men like Victor Kowalski didn't leave loose ends. They planned. They designed. They built traps that lasted for centuries. If Victor knew he was dying, and if he knew Sean was coming for his land, he wouldn't have left it to chance. He would have engineered a failsafe. I shoved the mail under my shirt to keep it dry and hurried back across the yard. The mud sucked at my shoes, trying to hold me back. I felt like I was carrying a live grenade. I had to find out what Victor had planned. I had to find his lawyer. The article mentioned a firm in a major city nearby, a prestigious legal group that handled estate planning for high-net-worth individuals. That was my next move. But as I crossed back into Sean's yard, looking at the half-dug hole where they planned to put their vanity pool, I realized something else. Victor wasn't just a victim. He was a tactician, and he had been watching them just as closely as they had been watching him. The trap was already set. I could feel it beneath my feet, and my son was about to walk right into it. I climbed into my 2004 Ford F-150, which had more rust on the fenders than paint, and turned the key. It coughed and sputtered like a dying smoker before finally turning over. I backed out of the cul-de-sac, leaving behind the muddy construction site that used to be a backyard, and headed toward the city. The drive took 40 minutes, and every mile felt like I was driving further away from the life I knew and deeper into a world I didn't understand. I parked in a downtown garage surrounded by sports cars and EVs. My old truck looked like a dinosaur in a spaceship showroom. The address on the letter led me to a glass skyscraper that pierced the clouds. I smoothed out my windbreaker, tucked my shirt in, and tried to look like I belonged there. But the reflection in the lobby glass just showed a tired old man who had been sleeping in a freezing garage. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was fast enough to pop my ears. When the doors opened, I stepped into a reception area that cost more than my entire pension. The receptionist looked up, ready to dismiss me, but before I could even give my name, a man walked out of the back offices. He was tall, silver-haired, and wearing a sharply tailored suit. He didn't look at my muddy shoes or my cheap jacket. He looked me dead in the eye and extended a hand. "Mr. Fuentes," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "I'm Arthur Sterling. We've been expecting you." He led me into a corner office overlooking the entire harbour. He poured me a cup of coffee, not from a machine, but from a silver French press, and sat across from me. He treated me with a deference that confused me. I was used to being ignored by my son and patronised by my daughter-in-law. Having this powerful man pour me coffee felt wrong somehow. I pulled the envelope and the magazine out from under my shirt and laid them on the mahogany desk. "I found these," I said, "in the trash. My son threw them out." Sterling nodded slowly, his expression grave. "I assumed as much. Mr. Kowalski knew his mail was being intercepted. He knew a lot of things." Sterling opened a leather folder on his desk. He didn't waste time with small talk. He leaned forward and spoke with the precision of a surgeon. "Peter, may I call you Peter? You need to understand who your neighbour was. Victor Kowalski wasn't just an engineer. He was a visionary. The portfolio he managed, the patents he held for structural steel integrity in high-stress environments, generated significant royalties. He didn't live in that little ranch house because he had to. He lived there because he chose to." He slid a balance sheet across the desk. I looked at the bottom line and felt the air leave my lungs. $12 million in liquid assets. Another $8 million in commercial real estate, including 2 warehouses near the docks and an office park. The man my daughter-in-law called a drifter could have bought our entire subdivision and paved it into a parking lot with pocket change. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why live like that? Why let them treat him like garbage?" Sterling stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city Victor had helped build. "Because he was mourning Peter. 30 years ago, he lost his wife and daughter in a car wreck on the interstate. A drunk driver crossed the median. Victor survived, but a piece of him died on that asphalt. He sold his big house, stepped down from the firm, and moved to the suburbs to find silence. He wanted to tend his roses, listen to his radio, and wait for the clock to run out so he could join them. He wanted peace, and your family denied him that." The way Sterling said "your family" made me flinch. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. "But surely," I stammered, "surely he could have stopped them. He could have hired you years ago. He could have sued them for harassment. He could have built a wall of lawyers around his house. Why did he just take it? Why did he pay the fines? Why did he let them humiliate him?" Sterling turned back to me, his eyes hard. He walked over to a large, flat-screen monitor on the wall and picked up a remote. "Because Victor was an engineer, Peter. He understood that pressure builds over time. He understood that if you want a structure to fail catastrophically, you don't chip away at the paint. You wait for the cracks in the foundation to propagate. And he was documenting every single crack." He pressed a button. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy but clear black and white feed. It was night vision footage from a camera mounted high in the eaves of Victor's house. I saw my son, Sean, stumbling through the backyard 3 years ago. He was drunk, holding a heavy rock. I watched him hurl it through Victor's kitchen window. I saw the glass shatter. I saw Sean laugh and stumble back to his house. I never knew about this. I thought a storm had broken that window. Victor never called the cops. He just taped cardboard over it. Sterling clicked to the next video. This one was from last summer. It showed Chloe standing at the fence line holding a piece of meat. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then tossed it into Victor's yard. A few moments later, Victor's old golden retriever, Buster, trotted into the frame. He ate the meat. The video skipped ahead an hour. It showed Victor carrying the dog's lifeless body to his car, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I felt like I was going to throw up. I gripped the arms of the leather chair so hard my knuckles went white. "They killed his dog," I whispered. "Chloe told me Buster ran away. She told me the old man lost him." Sterling nodded. "It was rat poison. Victor paid for the necropsy. He kept the report. He kept the video. He kept everything." "But why?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "Why didn't he have them arrested? That's animal cruelty. That's destruction of property. That's criminal." "Because he didn't want a misdemeanor conviction," Sterling said, his voice ice cold. "He didn't want them to pay a fine and do community service. He saw how greedy they were. He saw how they looked at his land. He knew eventually their greed would make them reckless. He told me once that your son was like a man building a tower on sand. Victor decided to wait until the tower was high enough so that when it fell, it would destroy everything. He was feeding the lawsuit, Peter. He was letting them commit trespass after trespass, building a record of systematic harassment and invasion so that when he finally pulled the trigger, there would be no defense and no mercy. Sterling sat back down and looked at me with a mix of pity and respect. He endured the insults. He endured the loss of his dog. He endured the dark shadow your son's fence cast over his garden. He endured it all because he was waiting for the one mistake that would cost them everything. And when they started digging that pool, when they tore down that fence, before his body was even cold, they walked right into the trap he spent 5 years designing. I stared at the blank screen where the evidence of my family's cruelty had just played. I felt a heavy stone settle in my gut. I had raised a monster. I had let a monster into my home. And the man next door, the man I had pitied, had been watching it all, cataloguing every sin, waiting for the moment when justice would be mathematical and absolute. Victor wasn't just a victim, he was the architect of their destruction, and I was the only one who could read the blueprints. Sterling closed the leather folder on his desk with a finality that echoed in the quiet office. The image of the dead dog was gone from the screen, but it was burned into my mind forever. I sat there trying to reconcile the son I thought I had raised with the monster I had just watched on that video feed. I felt hollowed out, wiped clean of any lingering loyalty. Sterling poured me another cup of coffee with deliberate, calm movements. He told me there was one more thing I needed to know. One final piece of the puzzle Victor had put into place just 7 days before his heart finally gave out. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a document bound in heavy blue paper. It was the last will and testament of Victor Kowalski. Sterling placed his hand over it, but didn't open it yet. He asked if I remembered the heat wave last August, the one that scorched the grass brown and cracked the earth. I remembered it well. Sean had gone on a rant about the water bill and shut off the outside spigots, putting a padlock on the valve so no one could use the hose. He claimed it was to save money, but I knew he did it because Victor's hose was too short to reach the back flower beds without tapping into our side. He wanted to watch the old man's garden die. I nodded, feeling the shame of that memory wash over me. Sterling leaned forward, his eyes softening for the first time. "Victor saw what you did, Peter." I looked at him, confused. That weekend, when Sean and Chloe drove out to the coast to party with their friends, I had stayed behind. I spent 2 days filling 5-gallon buckets in the bathtub, hauling them through the house, and carrying them out the back door. I climbed the fence Sean had built and watered every single one of Victor's heirloom roses by hand. I did it until my back spasmed and my hands blistered. I thought Victor was away at the hospital. I thought the house was empty. "He was there," Sterling said quietly. "He was watching from the upstairs bedroom window. He was too weak to come down, too proud to ask for help. But he saw you carrying those buckets. He saw you trying to save the only thing he had left to love." And that Tuesday he called me. He told me that for 40 years he had seen the absolute worst of humanity right across his property line. He had seen greed, vanity, and cruelty. But that day he saw decency. He told me, "Arthur, that man is the only decent person in that nest of vipers, and I want him to be the one who drops the hammer." Sterling opened the blue folder. He told me Victor originally planned to leave everything to a charitable trust, to liquidate the assets and donate them to the engineering school at the Institute of Technology. But after seeing you with the buckets, he changed his mind. He rewrote the entire will. He wanted you to have the house. He wanted you to have the land. He wanted you to have the $12 million portfolio. But there was a condition, a binding, specific instruction attached to the inheritance. "He wants you to execute justice," Sterling said, his voice like steel. "He doesn't just want you to be rich, Peter. He wants you to be the instrument of their education. He wants you to teach them the lesson they refuse to learn from him. And to do that, we have to let them hang themselves." We spent the next hour mapping out the strategy. It was a plan of terrifying simplicity. I had to go back to that house and do nothing. I had to let Sean hire the excavators. I had to let Chloe live stream her demolition plans. I had to stand by and watch as they tore up the earth, destroyed the garden, and poured the foundation for their vanity project. Sterling explained that if we stopped them now, if I revealed the will today, they would simply fight it in probate court. They would claim Victor was incompetent. They would drag it out for years. "But if we wait," Sterling said, tapping the desk with his pen, "if we wait until the heavy machinery is on the dirt, until the checks have cleared and the concrete is ordered, then they are committed. The moment that bulldozer blade cuts the soil, they are committing criminal trespass and malicious destruction of property on land that legally belongs to you. They will be sinking money they don't have into a hole they don't own. The bulldozer is the trigger, Peter. It's the point of no return." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a ruthless plan. It required me to watch my son destroy his financial future and say nothing. It required me to be complicit in his downfall. But then I thought about the rock through the window. I thought about the poisoned meat in the yard. I thought about the freezing room where they locked me away without heat or internet because I wouldn't co-sign a loan. They had made their choices. They had built their tower on sand, just like Victor said. I looked at Sterling and nodded. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll keep the secret." Sterling handed me a copy of the will and told me to keep it hidden, to keep it safe. He gave me a burner phone and told me to text him the second the first piece of heavy machinery hit the curb. I stood up, tucking the documents into my jacket. I felt different than when I walked in. I wasn't just a tired old man anymore. I was a soldier on a mission. I was the keeper of the roses. I walked out of that skyscraper and back to my rusty truck, ready to play my part in the final act of Victor Kowalski's long war. I was heading back to the Viper's nest, but this time I was the one carrying the venom. The waiting was the hardest part. It took Sean 7 days to find a contractor desperate enough to work a Sunday for cash. Or maybe it took him that long to scrape together the deposit from whatever predatory lender he had found. I spent those 7 days in my room, listening to them plot their victory lap through the thin walls. They talked about Italian tile patterns and heating systems, spending money they hadn't earned on land they didn't own. Every morning, I texted Sterling 2 words: not yet. Sunday morning arrived with the heavy industrial smell of diesel fumes. I looked out my frosted window and saw them. It wasn't a professional crew from a reputable firm with logos on their trucks. It was 3 rough-looking guys in a beat-up pickup towing a mini excavator that looked like it had survived a war zone. Sean was out there in his spotless designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, handing a thick brown envelope of cash to a guy with a neck tattoo. No clipboards, no city inspector, just cash in hand and a handshake. This was it. The trespass was about to become irreversible. I put on my boots. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I walked out the back door just as the excavator's engine roared to life, spitting a black cloud of smoke into the crisp autumn air. The operator wasted no time. He pulled the controls and the machine lurched forward, its metal tracks shredding the grass where the fence used to be. It crossed the invisible property line, the legal boundary Sean was treating as a suggestion, and rolled onto Victor's land. Chloe was there, of course. She had set up a tripod in the yard, pointing her phone at the destruction. She was wearing a white sundress that was totally inappropriate for a construction site, but perfect for social media. She had a ring light set up, fighting the overcast sky. I heard her shrill, performed voice cutting through the engine noise. "Hey guys, happy Sunday! We're finally doing it. Say goodbye to the creepy jungle next door. We are breaking ground on the infinity pool #renovation. #goodbye trash." She spun around, flashing a brilliant fake smile at the camera, framing the excavator in the background like it was a luxury prop. I saw the metal bucket rise into the air. It hovered over the centre of Victor's garden, directly above the prize-winning tea roses he had tended for 20 years. Those bushes were older than Sean. They were living things, cared for with gentle hands, and now they were about to be crushed by a machine paid for with stolen equity. I couldn't just watch from the porch. It had to be on the record. I had to give them one last chance to be human, even though I knew they wouldn't take it. I walked across the yard, stepping over the rubble of the old fence. I moved fast for my age, fueled by adrenaline and a righteous anger that felt cold and hard in my chest. I walked directly into the path of the machine. The operator saw me and slammed on the brakes, the bucket swinging dangerously close to my head. The engine idled down to a loud, choppy rhythm. Sean spun around, his face twisting from triumph to fury in a fraction of a second. "Dad!" he screamed, stomping across the torn-up grass. "What the hell are you doing? Get out of the way!" I stood my ground, planting my feet in the soft dirt of Victor's property. "You can't do this, Sean." I said, my voice loud enough to carry over the engine. "Shut it down! Send them home!" "This is wrong. You don't have permits. You don't have the title. You're destroying a good man's legacy for a hole in the ground." Sean got right in my face. I could smell the coffee on his breath and the desperation sweating out of his pores. "I don't care about permits," he yelled, spit flying from his lips. "I own this house. Understand, I'm building this pool." "You're embarrassing me. Look at them." He pointed at the confused crew watching the domestic dispute with amusement. "You want to humiliate me in front of the workers, Move." He grabbed my shoulder, trying to shove me aside, but I held firm. I was a foreman on a line building trucks for 30 years. I knew how to resist pressure. "I'm trying to save you," I said quietly, looking him dead in the eye. "If you dig this hole, you'll never be able to fill it back in." That was when Chloe stormed over like a fury. She had abandoned her tripod, her face contorted in a rage that ruined her perfect camera-ready smile. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She just reacted to the obstacle in her way. She lunged at me, planting both hands on my chest and shoving with all her might. "Get out of the shot, you senile old freak," she shrieked. I wasn't expecting it. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on a root and I went down hard. I hit the ground with a dull thud that knocked the wind out of my lungs. The mud instantly seeped into my clothes. I lay there for a second, staring up at the grey sky, listening to the gasp from the excavator operator. Chloe stood over me, panting, her hands balled into fists. She didn't offer to help me up. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She looked at Sean, her eyes wild. "Call the police! Call the cops! Tell them he's having a mental breakdown! Tell them he's trespassing and endangering the crew! Have him removed, Sean. Get him out of here right now." Sean looked at me, lying in the dirt, on the land he was trying to steal. He looked at his wife. He pulled out his phone. He made his choice. "Yeah," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, I'm calling. You brought this on yourself, Dad. You're a danger to yourself and others." I lay there in the mud, feeling the cold dampness soak into my skin. I didn't try to get up. I didn't try to stop him. I just closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. They had done it. They had assaulted me. They were calling the cops to remove me from property I legally owned. The trap hadn't just been triggered, it had snapped shut on their necks, and they were the ones pulling the noose tight. "Go ahead, son," I whispered to the sky. "Make the call." Sean hung up the phone with a look of supreme satisfaction, like he had just closed the biggest deal of his life. He looked down at me, still sitting in the mud, and shook his head with mock disappointment. "You did this to yourself, Dad," he said, loud enough for the construction crew to hear. "You're mentally unstable. I'm doing this for your own good." Chloe had gone back to her phone, probably texting her friends that the drama was escalating and that they were the victims, until the siren started. It didn't sound like the standard ambulance wail I expected. It was a deeper, more authoritative chirp, followed by the heavy rumble of engines. Sean puffed out his chest, smoothing his cashmere sweater. "Finally," he said, "the police are here. Now we'll get some order." He walked toward the driveway, ready to greet the officers like a homeowner welcoming guests to a party. He had his story ready. He had his lies rehearsed. But when the vehicles pulled into the cul-de-sac, Sean stopped walking. It wasn't a single patrol car, it was a motorcade. First came a heavy county sheriff's SUV, the kind driven by the sheriff himself, not a deputy. Behind it was a sleek black town car with tinted windows, followed by another sedan. They parked haphazardly, blocking the driveway, blocking the street, blocking any escape. The lights flashed blue and red, reflecting off the wet pavement and the confused faces of the excavator crew. Sheriff Mendez stepped out of the SUV. I knew Mendez. We fished at the same lake sometimes. He was a big man, with a face that looked like carved granite. He didn't look at Sean. He walked right past my son, his boots crunching on the gravel. Sean tried to intercept him, waving his hand. "Sheriff, thank God you're here. My father is having an episode. He's trespassing and he assaulted my wife. We need him removed immediately." Mendez didn't even slow down. He walked straight over to where I was sitting in the dirt. He squatted down, offering a hand the size of a baseball glove. "Peter," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Are you hurt? Do you need a medic?" I took his hand and let him pull me up. My knees popped and mud dripped from my slacks, but I stood tall. "I'm fine, Sheriff," I said, brushing off my jacket. "Just a little dirty." Sean looked confused. His narrative was falling apart. "Sheriff, why are you helping him? He's the aggressor. He's on my property." That was when the back door of the black town car opened. Arthur Sterling stepped out of the vehicle. He didn't look like he belonged on a muddy construction site. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom or a federal courthouse. He wore an overcoat over his suit and carried a leather briefcase. Two younger associates flanked him, carrying rolled-up documents and an industrial staple gun. Sterling walked right past Sean like my son was a ghost. He marched straight up to the mini excavator. The operator, who had been watching the scene with wide eyes, shrank back in his seat. Sterling didn't say a word to him. He simply took a large, bright orange piece of paper from one of his associates. It had big, bold, black letters. With a loud thwack, Sterling stapled the paper directly onto the windshield of the excavator. It was a cease and desist order issued by a judge less than an hour ago. "Shut it down," Sterling told the operator. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Kill the engine and step out of the vehicle. If you move that bucket one more inch, I will have your license revoked and your equipment impounded as evidence in a felony investigation." The operator killed the engine instantly. The silence that fell over the yard was heavy and suffocating. Sean finally found his voice. He stormed over to Sterling, his face flushed a deep, angry crimson. "Who the hell do you think you are? You can't stick things on my equipment. This is my land. This is my project. Get off my property before I sue you for everything you own." Sterling turned slowly. He looked at Sean with the same expression one might use when inspecting a particularly annoying insect. "Mr. Sean Vargas, I presume?" "I am Arthur Sterling. I represent the estate of Victor Kowalski, and you are currently standing in the middle of a crime scene." Sean let out a high, desperate laugh. "The estate! The man is dead. He had no family. This land is abandoned. It has no owner. I have the right to improve it. I have the right to claim it under adverse possession laws. I'm doing the neighborhood a favor." He was reciting the legal terms he had Googled, throwing them out like magic spells, thinking they would protect him. He pointed at the muddy ground. "This land belongs to no one," he yelled. "It's free for the taking." Sterling adjusted his cufflinks, looked at the sheriff, then at the excavator, and finally at Sean. He shook his head slightly. "You are mistaken, young man. This land is not ownerless. It has never been ownerless." Victor Kowalski was a meticulous man. He left very specific instructions.
Sean scoffed. Oh yeah, and who owns it then? Some distant cousin in Poland? Some charity that doesn't even know this place exists? I'll fight them in probate for years. I'll have my pool built before they even find the deed. Sterling reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. He didn't hand it to Sean. He held it up like a shield. "There will be no probate fight," Sterling said. "The deed has already been transferred. The title is clear. And the new owner is not in Poland. The new owner is not a charity." Sean looked around the yard, his eyes darting frantically. "Then where are they? Who?" Sterling stepped aside, clearing the line of sight between Sean and me. He gestured toward me with an open hand. "The owner is standing right in front of you," Sterling said. "The owner of this land, the owner of that house, and the owner of the dirt you are currently trespassing on is Mr. Peter Fuentes." The silence that followed Sterling's declaration was heavier than the idle machinery on the ruined lawn. It was a vacuum that sucked the air right out of my son's lungs. Sean blinked, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, trying to process the impossibility of what he had just heard. He looked at the lawyer, then at me, standing there covered in mud, on the land he had tried to steal. "You're lying," Sean stammered, the bravado draining out of him like water from a cracked bucket. "That's impossible. My dad is broke. He gave us everything he had. He doesn't own anything. He lives in my guest room." Sterling didn't argue. He simply flipped open the blue folder with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet morning. He adjusted his glasses and began to read, projecting his voice clearly so even the sheriff and the construction crew could hear every syllable. "I, Victor Kowalski, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all my real and personal estate to the only neighbor who showed me kindness in my final years. To Mr. Peter Fuentes, I leave my primary residence. I leave my commercial properties in the capital. I leave my patent portfolio and the entirety of my investment accounts, currently valued at just over $12 million. $12 million. The number hung in the air, shimmering like a mirage. I saw the exact moment the figure hit Chloe's brain. She dropped her phone. It hit the pavement with a crunch, but she didn't even look down. Her eyes were locked on me, dilating with a sudden, terrifying realization. The color didn't just drain from her face. It was replaced by an adrenaline flush. She looked at Sean, and I saw a silent communication pass between them, a frantic recalculation of their entire reality. They looked at the muddy old man they had just assaulted, the man they had shoved into the dirt, the man they had called senile and dangerous. But they didn't see a victim anymore. They saw a winning lottery ticket. They saw a walking, breathing ATM that had just been loaded with $12 million. The transformation was instantaneous and sickening. It was like watching a snake shed its skin in fast forward. The sneer vanished from Sean's face, replaced by a wide, trembling smile that looked painted on. Chloe let out a gasp that sounded like a sob of joy. She ran forward, stepping over the rubble of the fence she had ordered destroyed, her arms wide open. "Oh my God, Dad!" she cried, her voice pitching up into a squeal of delight. "Oh my God, this is incredible! Did you hear that? $12 million! You won! We won! It's a miracle!"
She tried to reach for me, her hands fluttering to brush the mud off my jacket, ignoring the fact that she was the one who put me there. She acted like the last 10 minutes hadn't happened, like she hadn't just ordered the cops to drag me away. Sean was right behind her, laughing nervously, clapping his hands. "I knew it," he babbled, his eyes wild with greed. "I knew you had a plan, Dad. You were playing the long game, weren't you? You buddied up to the old guy. You won his favor. That is genius, pure genius. We're going to be set for life. Think about what we can do with that money. We can expand the house properly. We can buy the lot on the other side. We can invest too. We're rich, Dad. We're finally rich." They stood there, surrounding me, their faces beaming with predatory hunger. They didn't even try to hide it. They were already spending the money in their heads. They were already planning the vacations, the cars, the parties. They thought it was automatic. They thought because I was their father, my money was their money. They thought blood was a contract that entitled them to everything I had, regardless of how they treated me. I looked at Chloe's manicured hands brushing mud off my lapel. I looked at Sean's desperate, grinning face, and I felt a coldness settle in my chest that was deeper than the winter chill. I realized I didn't know these people. I had raised Sean. I had fed him, clothed him, and taught him how to ride a bike. But the man standing in front of me was a stranger. A stranger who would push his own father into the mud for a swimming pool and then hug him for a check. I pushed Chloe's hands away from me. The motion was gentle but firm, and she froze, her smile faltering for a second. I reached out and took the handkerchief Sterling offered me. I wiped my face, clearing away the grit and dirt. Then I stood up straight. My back ached, my knees throbbed, but I felt taller than I had in years. I looked at Sean. I looked at Chloe. I let the silence stretch until their smiles started to tremble, until the fear started creeping back into their eyes. I wanted them to feel this moment. I wanted them to remember it for the rest of their lives. There is no we. I said, my voice flat and hard as granite. There is no us. There is no our money. Victor didn't leave this to the family. He left it to me, and only me. Sean's laugh wavered. "Come on, Dad," he said with a nervous, bubbling chuckle. "What's yours is ours. That's how family works. We take care of each other." I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at the mud stains on my shirt. "You didn't take care of me when you shut off my heat," I said. "You didn't take care of me when you called me a guest in the house I paid for. You didn't take care of me 5 minutes ago when you watched your wife shove me to the ground and called the cops to have me arrested." Chloe tried to jump in, her voice shaking. "We were just stressed, Peter. We didn't mean it. We were protecting you." I turned my cold gaze on her. "Stop talking," I said. "Just stop. You weren't protecting me. You were discarding me. But the tables have turned now, and you need to understand something very clearly." I pointed a finger at my own chest. "This is my inheritance. This is my house now. This is my land. It's mine, not yours. And you're about to find out exactly what that means." Sterling wasn't finished. He watched the realization of the money sink in. He watched greed distort their faces. And then he reached into the black tube he had been carrying under his arm. He popped the cap off with a soft thwack and slid out a large rolled-up sheet of paper. It wasn't a standard blueprint. It was old, yellowed at the edges, smelling of cedar and age.
He unrolled it across the hood of the sheriff's SUV, pinning the corners down with his phone and the stapler. "Come here," Sterling said, beckoning to Sean. "You need to see this. You too, Peter." Sean walked over, still vibrating with the adrenaline of the $12 million he thought he had just won. He looked at the drawing. It was a topographical map of the entire subdivision, dated 1975. The lines were drawn in precise black ink by hand, the work of a master draftsman. In the bottom corner, signed in a sharp, angular hand, was the name Victor Kowalski, Chief Surveyor. Sterling traced a line with his finger. "This is Lot 402, your house, Sean, and this is Lot 403, Victor's house. Now look closely at the boundary." Sean squinted. "Looks like a normal property line."
"What's your point?" "Look closer," Sterling urged. I leaned in. I saw it. It was a thin, almost invisible double line that didn't just separate the properties. It wrapped around Lot 402 like a noose. It ran along the side, along the back, and crucially, along the front, separating Sean's yard from the public street. "Victor didn't just buy the lot next door," Sterling explained, his voice calm and devastating. "When he laid out this subdivision 40 years ago, he kept a remnant, a specific, deeded parcel of land, exactly 1 foot wide. A spite strip." Sean laughed, but it sounded wet and weak. "A spite strip? You're kidding. It's 12 inches of dirt. Who cares?" Sterling looked up, locking eyes with Sean. "You should care, because that 12-inch strip of land completely surrounds your property. It stands between you and the road. It stands between you and the neighbours. And currently your garage, your front porch, and your entire driveway are built directly on top of it." The silence that fell was absolute. The excavator's engine ticked as it cooled. The sheriff shifted his stance, looking at the map with professional interest. Sean shook his head. "No, that's impossible. We have a driveway. We've been driving over it for years." Sterling nodded. "Yes, because Victor granted the previous owner a revocable easement, a personal permission to cross his land to reach the street. It was a neighbourly gesture. But here is the problem with personal easements, Sean. They are not permanent. They don't run with the land. And most importantly, they terminate automatically upon the death of the grantor." He rolled up the map slowly, the sound of the paper crackling like dry bones. "When Victor died on Tuesday, that easement died with him. As of this moment, you have no legal right to cross that 12-inch strip. You cannot back your car out of your garage. You cannot walk from your front door to the mailbox without trespassing on Mr. Fuentes' land." I looked at my son. The greed was gone, replaced by a dawning of absolute horror. He knew real estate. He knew what this meant. He wasn't just a guy with a dispute. He was the owner of a landlocked property. Sterling delivered the final blow. In this state, a property without deeded access to a public road is effectively unsellable. You cannot sell it. You cannot refinance it. And since you just violated the terms of your mortgage by destroying the value of the collateral, the bank is going to be very interested in this development. Your house, Sean, is worth 0. Actually, it's worth less than 0 because you owe a mortgage on a house you can't legally enter. Sean stumbled backward like he had taken a physical punch. He looked at his house, the mansion he was so proud of, the symbol of his status. It was a prison now. A beautiful stucco prison surrounded by a moat of legal technicalities he couldn't cross. Chloe screamed. It wasn't a word, just a sound of pure panic. She looked at her car parked in the driveway. She looked at the street. She realized she was trapped. "But we have rights," Sean yelled, his voice cracking. "We have rights of necessity. They have to give us access." Sterling smiled, and it was a smile with absolutely no warmth. Actually, no. Victor was very specific in his will. He explicitly forbade the granting of any future easements to the owners of Lot 402. He created a restrictive covenant. The only person who can grant you access is the new owner, Mr. Fuentes, and he is under no legal obligation to do so, especially after you just assaulted him. Sean turned to me. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. He looked at the mud on my clothes. He looked at the sheriff standing behind me. He looked at the ruins of the fence he had destroyed. He realized the leverage had shifted so completely that the world had flipped upside down. He fell to his knees. It wasn't a gesture of respect. It was a collapse. He sank into the mud of the construction site he had created. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, please. The bank, the loans, I mortgaged everything. If I can't access the road, they'll call the note due. I'll lose everything. I'll go bankrupt." I looked down at him. I remembered the freezing nights in the unheated room. I remembered being told to disappear. I remembered the way he kicked Victor's roses. I looked at the map in Sterling's hand, the 12-inch line Victor had drawn 40 years ago. A silent, patient trap, waiting for the right moment. I took a step forward, placing my boot on the invisible line that separated my land from his prison. "That's not up to me, son," I said. "That's up to the law. And right now, the law says you're trespassing. So I suggest you figure out how to fly, because you're not driving out of here over my land." That night, the house smelled unnatural. It didn't smell like expensive takeout or the cloying scented candles Chloe usually burned to mask the scent of reality. It smelled like roast chicken and rosemary. For the first time in the 2 years I had lived there, Chloe was cooking. She wore a floral apron over her designer clothes, moving around the kitchen with a frantic, desperate energy, chopping vegetables like her life depended on it. She was play-acting, trying to show me she could be the dutiful daughter-in-law she had never been. It was a stage play, and I was the audience they were trying to win over. I sat at the head of the dining table, a spot Sean usually reserved for himself as the man of the house. My plate was full, but I wasn't eating. I was watching my son. He wasn't sitting. He was on the floor, on his knees, right next to my chair. The arrogant real estate mogul who had lectured me about adverse possession that morning was gone. In his place was a terrified little boy who had broken something expensive and knew there was no way to fix it. His face was blotchy and wet with tears that for once I believed were real, not because he was sorry, but because he was terrified. "Dad, please," Sean sobbed, his hands gripping the edge of the tablecloth like a drowning man clinging to a raft. "You have to sign the transfer. It's just a piece of paper." "It's 12 inches of dirt, Dad. That's all it is. If you don't sign it, the bank will find out. They do audits, Dad. If they see the title is clouded, if they see there's no legal ingress, they'll call the loan. They'll foreclose next week. We'll be on the street. We'll lose everything." I cut a piece of chicken, slowly listening to the scrape of the knife against the porcelain. I didn't look at him. I watched the steam rise from the meat. I took a bite. It was dry, overcooked, and flavourless, but I chewed it methodically. Sean didn't stop there. Desperation acted like a truth serum, vomiting up secrets he had kept hidden behind his leased cars and credit card shuffling. "And I need help, Dad. Real help. I need money from the estate. Just a loan. I'll pay you back, I swear on my life. I owe people, Dad, not banks. Bad people." I gambled. I thought I could double the renovation money on risky futures, but I lost it. I lost it all. And the pool contractors took a deposit I didn't have. If I don't pay them, they're coming back, and they're not bringing a cease and desist. They're going to break my legs. "Dad, please. You have $12 million now. $2 million is nothing to you." Chloe stopped chopping at the stove. She stood there, her back to us, her shoulders shaking. She knew. She had known all along that their lifestyle was a house of cards, built on debt and deceit. And she had been happy to live in it, as long as the walls held up. Now that the roof was caving in, she was cooking chicken like that would fix a felony. I swallowed the dry meat and took a sip of water. I looked down at my son, sobbing on his Persian rug, begging for a signature and a check to erase all his mistakes. I tried to feel pity. I tried to find that well of paternal instinct that's supposed to make you sacrifice everything for your child. But all I could feel was the phantom sensation of the cold, wet mud on my back from that morning. I closed my eyes, and the memory played in high definition. I saw Chloe's face twisted in a snarl as she shoved me. I felt the impact of the hard ground knocking the wind out of my lungs. I heard Sean's voice, cold and decisive, telling the operator to call the cops. I heard him say I was dangerous. I heard him say I was mentally unstable. They hadn't just pushed an old man, they had pushed away their only safety net. They wanted me to save them from the consequences of their own greed. They wanted me to use Victor's money, the money of the man they had tormented and mocked, to pay off gambling debts and save a house they had tried to steal from me. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost admirable in its pure narcissism. They truly believed that because I was their father, I existed solely to absorb their failures. I set my fork down on the plate with a deliberate clink. The sound seemed to echo in the room, silencing Sean's sobs. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes full of pathetic hope. He thought I was going to pull out a checkbook. He thought that because I was eating his food, I was buying his lies. He didn't realize I wasn't having dinner with my family. I was eating a final meal with strangers who had occupied my life for far too long. I looked at Chloe, who had turned around, wiping her eyes with a dish towel, waiting for the verdict. I looked at Sean, still kneeling. I didn't say a word about the money. I didn't ask about the gambling or the threats. I just pushed my plate away and wiped my mouth with a napkin. The silence stretched as taut as a piano wire, ready to snap. They were waiting for the rescue. They were waiting for soft old Dad to come back. But that man was still lying in the mud where they left him. The man sitting at the table was the owner of the land they were standing on, and he had a very different plan for their future. I placed my fork gently on the table, and the little metallic clink sounded like a judge's gavel hitting the bench. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and my son's ragged breathing. Sean and Chloe were looking at me with a mix of terror and desperate hope, waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to pull out a checkbook and make the nightmare go away. They wanted the father who had bailed them out for 40 years. But that father was gone. He had been replaced by the man they created, A man who had learned the hard way that sometimes the only way to save someone is to let them fall. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Sean's eyes widened, tracking the movement, praying for a wallet. Instead, I pulled out a thick, cream-coloured envelope bearing the embossed seal of Sterling's law firm. I slid it across the mahogany table. It glided smoothly over the polished wood, stopping right between Sean's knees and his plate of cold chicken. "Read it," I said, my voice calm and completely devoid of the anger that had consumed me earlier. "It's not a check, Sean. It's a notice. It's the legal response to your request for access to my land. Sean picked up the document with shaking hands, tearing it open and scanning the pages frantically. As he read, his face went from pale to a sickly shade of grey. He dropped the papers like they were burning his hands. "What is this?" he whispered. "You can't do this. This is a death sentence." Chloe snatched the papers up. "What does it say?" she demanded. "What did he do?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands over my stomach. "I'll summarize it for you," I said. Point 1. Regarding your request for a permanent easement to cross the 12-inch strip of land that Victor owned and that I now own, the answer is no. Denied. I am exercising my right as the property owner to restrict access. Starting tomorrow at 8 a.m., I will be installing a permanent barrier along the property line. Your driveway will be blocked. You will not be able to drive a vehicle on or off this property legally. Your house is officially landlocked." Chloe gasped, looking from the paper to me, her eyes filled with venom. "You're trapping us," she hissed. "You're locking us in." "I'm protecting my property rights," I corrected her. Which brings me to point 2. The document clearly states that according to the survey Victor commissioned in 1975 and confirmed by the sheriff this morning, your 3-car garage and attached mudroom are encroaching on my land by exactly 14 inches. You built on property that didn't belong to you. Therefore, you have 14 days to remove the encroaching structures. "Remove them?" Sean choked out. "You mean demolish them? You want me to tear down my garage in 2 weeks? That will cost tens of thousands of dollars. I don't have that money." "That sounds like a personal problem," I said, keeping my voice steady. "If the structures aren't removed in 14 days, I'll hire a demolition crew to remove them for you and place a lien on whatever equity is left in this house to pay for it." "But why?" Chloe wailed, throwing the papers down. "Why are you doing this? You have $12 million. You're rich. You don't need that land. Why are you destroying us over a foot of dirt?" "Because it's not just about the dirt, Chloe," I said. "It's about what happens next, which brings me to point 3. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the dark expanse of Victor's yard. The land they had tried to steal. The land they had disrespected. I turned back to face them. "You asked me for $2 million to pay off your debts. You asked me to use Victor's legacy to clean up your mess. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I've decided to invest the entirety of the $12 million estate into a project Victor would have loved. I am donating the land and the funds to the city." "Donating it?" Sean asked, bewildered. "For what?" I smiled, and for the first time that day it was a genuine smile. "I'm going to build the Victor Kowalski Veterans Memorial Park. It will be a public space, a sanctuary for veterans suffering from PTSD, just like Victor did after the war. There will be walking trails, therapy gardens, and a community centre. And the best part is, it will be open to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Chloe stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "A public park!" she screamed. "Right next door! You're going to bring strangers into our neighbourhood. Homeless people, veterans, noise, traffic. It'll destroy our property value. We live in a gated community. Peter, you can't turn it into a public spectacle." I looked at her, seeing the snobbery that had rotted her soul. "It's not your neighbourhood anymore, Chloe. It's my land. And yes, there will be people, good people Victor would have welcomed, the kind of people you built a 10-foot fence to keep out. Now the fence is gone and the park is coming." Sean was still on the floor, staring into nothingness. "The bank," he muttered. "If the house is landlocked and the garage has to be torn down and there's a public park next door, the appraisal will tank, the bank will call the loan immediately, they'll foreclose." I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a comforting gesture, it was a goodbye. "Exactly," I said. "You're a smart boy, Sean. You finally did the math. The bank is going to take this house. You have about 30 days before foreclosure proceedings start. 30 days to pack up your designer clothes and your architectural blueprints and find a rental you can actually afford." "Dad, please," he begged, grabbing my pant leg. "Where will we go? We'll be homeless. You can't let them take our home." I pulled my leg away. "It's not your home, son. It never was. It was a stage set you built, with my money. And when the bank auctions it off, when the price hits rock bottom, because the property is landlocked and has a demolition order on it, I'll be there. I'll buy this house from the bank for pennies on the dollar." "And then what?" Sean asked, a flicker of hope appearing in his eyes. "You'll give it back to us? You'll let us live here?" "No," I said, extinguishing that hope forever. "I'll buy it so I can bulldoze it. I'll tear this house down to the foundation. I'll rip up the marble floors and the granite countertops. I'll erase every trace of the vanity and greed that lived here. And then I'll seed the dirt with grass and expand the Veterans Park. Your legacy, Sean, will be a picnic area where heroes can finally find some peace." I picked up my jacket and walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd see. 2 people who had spent their lives worshipping money, finally realizing the bill had come due and they were bankrupt in every way that mattered. The air outside was cold, but for the first time in years, I could breathe. It's been 6 months since the day the bank finally foreclosed on Lot 402. 6 months since the sheriff arrived to evict my son and his wife from a home they could no longer legally enter. The legal process was brutal and fast, just like Sterling promised it would be. Without a driveway and with a demolition order hanging over the garage, the property's appraised value plummeted to almost nothing. The bank cut its losses and put it up for auction. I was the only bidder. I bought it for the price of the dirt, minus the cost of the demolition I had to perform. It cost me a fraction of what Sean had borrowed to build it. Now I'm sitting on the front porch of Victor's house. It doesn't look like the rundown shack Chloe used to complain about. I spent $300,000 restoring it. I stripped the siding to reveal the original cedar shingles. I replaced the windows. I brought the garden back to life. It's a beautiful, dignified home that fits the land it sits on. But the best part of the view isn't the house itself. It's what lies to the east, where Sean's stucco mansion once stood, blocking the sun and looming over us like a monument to vanity. Now there's only green. I kept my word. The day the deed transferred to my name, I hired a crew. We didn't just tear the house down, we erased it. We ground up the marble tiles and granite countertops into gravel to line the park's walking trails. We filled the hole where the infinity pool was supposed to go with rich topsoil. Now it's a rolling lawn dotted with young oak trees and benches dedicated to local veterans. The Victor Kowalski Veterans Memorial Park opened last week. Chloe was wrong about the noise. It's quiet here. The people who come are respectful. I see old men in baseball caps sitting by the new fountain, telling stories to their grandkids. I see young soldiers back from deployment finding a place where they can just sit and breathe without looking over their shoulders. It's a sanctuary, and right in the middle, where Sean's master bedroom used to be, there's a bronze plaque telling the story of the engineer who designed bridges and saved his best work for his own backyard. As for Sean and Chloe, the end of the money was the end of the marriage. Chloe didn't stick around for the bankruptcy hearings. The moment the eviction notice was posted, she packed her bags and moved back in with her parents, blaming Sean for destroying her life. She filed for divorce 3 weeks later, citing irreconcilable differences, which I assume is legal code for he's broke. Sean didn't fight it. He couldn't. He hit rock bottom just like I knew he would. He lives in a studio apartment on the south side of the city now. It's small, cramped, and smells like old cooking oil, but he pays the rent himself. He got a job selling cars at a lot near the highway. It's a humbling gig. He's on his feet all day, dealing with people who treat him the way he used to treat me. I went to see him last week. I didn't give him money. I didn't offer him a room. I just took him out for a burger. He looked tired. His hair was thinning, and he had lost that arrogant shine that comes from thinking you're better than everyone else. He didn't ask me for a loan. He didn't talk about grand schemes or real estate plays. He talked about his sales quota. He talked about how hard it is to close a deal when the customer doesn't trust you. "Dad," he said, looking down at his fries, "you were right about everything. I built a life on debt and pretended it was success. I'm sorry. I believed him. It will take him years to dig out of the hole he dug. He has debts to pay and a credit history to rebuild. But for the first time in his life, he's building on solid ground. He's learning that you can't cheat gravity and you can't steal a foundation. I told him that if he keeps his job for a year, if he shows me he can live within his means, maybe we can talk about a small role managing the park's maintenance. Maybe. But he has to earn it. No more handouts." I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the park. The light hit the antique roses, which were blooming later than usual this year, a burst of deep red against the green grass. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since before my wife died. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I wasn't a tenant. I was the keeper of this place. I looked up at the sky where the first stars were starting to peek through the twilight. I raised my mug in a silent toast to the empty air, to the memory of the man who had been watching from the window all those years. "They called you Dangerous Victor," I whispered to the wind, and they were right. You were the most dangerous kind of man there is. You were a man who knew the value of patience. You were a man who knew that the truth is heavier than any lie. You didn't use a gun. You didn't use your fists. You used a 12-inch strip of dirt and a map from 1975 to bring down a fortress of greed. You taught my son the lesson I was too weak to teach him. You saved him by destroying him. I took a drink, smiling as I watched a young couple walk their dog along the path that used to be Sean's driveway. The dog stopped to sniff the exact spot where the spite strip used to block the way. There were no barriers now, no fences, no walls, just open land and the legacy of a quiet engineer who played the long game and won. "Thank you, Victor," I said, my voice steady and strong in the quiet evening. "You really were the best neighbor a man could ask for. And you were right about one thing. The view from here is finally perfect." We often mistake silence for weakness and patience for fear. They looked at an old man and saw a victim, never realizing that the quietest people often leave the heaviest impact. Victor taught us that you cannot build a life on stolen ground. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is let his son hit rock bottom. Greed is a fire that eventually burns down its own house, but integrity is a fortress that stands long after we are gone. True wealth isn't what you take, it's what you leave behind.